James Athey, Investment Director de ABRD. Good morning, James.
Hi, good morning.
ECB raised interest rates back to record high as investors bet against further rate rise. What is your opinion about this hike and the potential hike in September in this moment?
Yeah, I think what we heard from the ECB was very similar to what we heard from the Fed. We're definitely at that stage of the process where central banks think they've probably done enough, but they do not want to say that with any degree of certainty, because that would make future hikes more disruptive for markets, and indeed markets could get carried away with the idea that they are being dovish, ease financial conditions, and therefore make central banks' jobs more difficult in the future. That being said, the European data has been very weak recently, certainly relative to the US. My suspicion is this July hike was the last that we will see.
Lagarde offered a downbeat assessment of a deteriorated economic outlook as she delivered a new interest rate increase and said that the Governing Council is open-minded on another potential hike in September. Is Lagarde preparing Europe for a hit to growth as the US soars?
Well, we're already seeing it, really. I mean, we've seen there was a revision to the Eurozone GDP data, but Germany certainly has been in technical recession with 2 negative quarters of growth. The latest survey data that we saw in the PMIs really showed deterioration across the region and across both manufacturing and service sectors. And while we do not know with certainty the lags that are involved in monetary policy, we do know that policy changes today will not fully impact the economy for at least 6 to 12 months, possibly as long as 2 years. And so if you add that together, the reality is that monetary policy decisions from 6 or 12 months ago will start to slow the economy to a greater degree from here forward. All of that should have had investors already prepared for a slowdown.
On Wednesday, from the Federal Reserve, Powell lifted rates and he leaves the door open to another hike in September. Economists predict Federal Reserve is done with interest rates rise. Are you agree?
It's a really interesting one because as it stands today, the US data is much stronger than Europe and actually looks quite strong regardless of a comparison to other countries. Yet the market has a very low probability of a September hike, whereas in Europe it's the other way round. The data has been weak, but the market has a 2/3 or more probability of another hike in September. That looks the wrong way around to us, but we do suspect that the Fed will choose to pause in September, even if the data is still quite strong, to allow itself more time as it did in June. We think by the next meeting in November, the data will probably look a lot less supportive. So again, our bias, our base case is that this was the last hike from the Fed, but we're less sure about that one relative to the ECB.
Central bank, both Fed and ECB, say inflation remains elevated in regarding to 2% target. Do you think that are we going to live with a higher inflation?
I'm a little skeptical of that idea, certainly over the near term. I think there are some valid arguments suggesting a structurally higher rate of inflation longer into the future, but I do think that the cyclical forces, and they will dominate over the next 6 or 12 months, I do think the cyclical forces will continue to push inflation lower. Largely, the bulk of inflation that we have seen through this period has related to issues of the supply side of the economy. These aren't things that central banks can affect, but they are things which also moderate through time. I think the bulk of the increase and the bulk of the decrease in inflation we have seen so far actually just relates to the passing of the supply shocks, the global lockdowns, the situation between Russia and Ukraine, largely to blame. So I do think by the end of this year, there's a chance we worry more about disinflation and low inflation than we do high inflation, at least over the short term.
Okay, James Athey, Investment Director de ABRD, thank you for this time in Negocios Televisión. Thank you, good day and good business.
Thank you, you too.